What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors faces off against a late-night host, known for his sharp tongue and controversial takes? You won't believe what unfolds when Johnny Depp sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a lighthearted promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two entertainment giants collide in a battle that will leave you speechless. The stage was set for what appeared to be a routine celebrity interview. Johnny Depp, fresh off his recent legal victories and career resurgence, had agreed to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live to promote his latest film project. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, eager to see the charismatic actor who had captured hearts worldwide with his iconic roles and recent triumphant return to the spotlight. As the show's familiar theme music played and the cameras rolled, Jimmy Kimmel emerged with his trademark smirk, clearly relishing the opportunity to have such a high-profile guest. The comedian had been known for his increasingly confrontational style with certain celebrities, and tonight would prove to be no exception. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Johnny Depp," Kimmel announced with exaggerated enthusiasm, his voice carrying an undertone that suggested this wouldn't be the typical softball interview his audience might expect. Depp walked onto the set with his characteristic swagger, dressed in his signature style of layered jewelry and dark clothing. He waved to the enthusiastic crowd, flashing that famous crooked smile that had made him a global icon. But even as he settled into the guest chair, there was something in his eyes that suggested he was prepared for whatever might come his way. "Johnny, welcome to the show," Kimmel began, his tone already carrying a hint of the antagonism that would soon explode into full view. "You know, it's interesting having you here, considering all the drama you've been through recently." The comment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Depp's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure, adjusting his rings and crossing his legs with deliberate casualness. "Well, Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my work, my art, and the projects I'm passionate about. I think that's what your audience would be interested in hearing about." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to something more predatory. "Oh, but Johnny, your personal life has been quite the spectacle, hasn't it? I mean, the whole world watched as you aired your dirty laundry in court. Some might say it was quite the performance." The audience began to sense the tension building. What had started as typical late-night banter was quickly morphing into something more uncomfortable. Depp's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady when he responded. "I think what the world saw was a man defending his reputation and his truth against false accusations," Depp replied, his tone measured but with an edge creeping in. "Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's difficult." Kimmel's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Defending your reputation? Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I was sitting, it looked like a very expensive way to rehash some pretty ugly personal details. I mean, let's be honest here, Johnny. The whole thing was a mess, wasn't it?" The comment struck like a physical blow. Depp's hands, which had been resting casually on the chair's armrests, now gripped them tightly. His voice, when he spoke, carried a warning that anyone who knew him would recognize as dangerous territory. "Jimmy, I came here tonight as a guest on your show, expecting to have a conversation about my work and my future projects. I didn't come here to be ambushed with your personal opinions about my private life." Depp's accent, which often carried a hint of various influences from his time abroad, became more pronounced as his emotions intensified. But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Depp's obvious discomfort. "Ambushed? Come on, Johnny. You're a public figure. You made your private life very public. I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking." "Are you?" Depp shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Or are you just looking for a cheap shot at someone who's been through hell and back? Because that's what this feels like to me." The audience was completely silent now, The usual laughter and applause replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. Even the band members, usually animated and engaged, appeared frozen in their seats, unsure of how to react to the increasingly hostile exchange. Kimmel pressed on, seemingly oblivious to or perhaps deliberately ignoring the warning signs. Hell and back? Johnny, you brought most of this on yourself. The drinking, the erratic behavior, the lawsuits. I mean, at what point do you take responsibility for your own actions? The question hit Depp like a slap across the face. His entire demeanor shifted, the laid-back Hollywood charm replaced by something much more intense and focused. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but there was an unmistakable fury burning beneath the surface. Responsibility, Depp repeated, leaning forward in his chair. You want to talk about responsibility, Jimmy? Let's talk about the responsibility of a talk show host to treat his guests with basic human decency. Let's talk about the responsibility of someone with a platform to not kick a man when he's already been through public humiliation. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was becoming one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night television history. But neither man seemed willing to back down, and the collision course they were on would only intensify from here. Kimmel, emboldened by what he perceived as getting under Depp's skin, decided to push even harder. His media training had taught him to never let a guest gain the upper hand, but he was crossing lines that even seasoned television veterans would hesitate to approach. Basic human decency, he scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. That's rich coming from someone who's been accused of some pretty indecent behavior himself. The studio fell into an even deeper silence, if that was possible. Even the production crew, usually bustling with quiet activity behind the cameras, had stopped what they were doing to watch the train wreck unfolding before them. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was becoming a public execution, and everyone present knew they were witnessing television history in the making. Depp's eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity that those who knew him well would recognize as a warning sign. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of pain and frustration. You know what, Jimmy? I've sat through a lot of interviews in my career. I've dealt with tough questions, challenging hosts, and difficult situations, but I've never encountered someone so deliberately cruel. Cruel? Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm just being honest. Something you might want to try sometime. The American public deserves to know who they're really supporting when they buy tickets to your movies. That was the moment everything changed. Depp's carefully maintained composure began to crack, revealing the raw emotion underneath. His hands, adorned with their collection of rings and jewelry, clenched into fists as he leaned forward in his chair. The American public? You mean the same public that supported me through my darkest hours? The same people who saw through the lies and manipulation? Oh, please, Kimmel interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. Spare me the victim act, Johnny. You're not the hero in this story. You're a middle-aged man who couldn't handle his personal life falling apart, so you dragged everyone through the mud to save your own reputation. The audience was completely stunned. What they had come to see as entertainment had transformed into something far more serious and disturbing. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others pulled out their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Depp stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the silent studio. For a moment it seemed like he might walk away, but instead he turned to face Kimmel directly, his full attention focused on the host who had pushed him to this breaking point. You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy? Depp's voice was now filled with barely controlled rage. It's a man who builds his career on tearing down others, a man who hides behind comedy and claims he's just asking tough questions when really he's just another bully with a microphone. Kimmel's expression shifted slightly, perhaps finally realizing that he had pushed too far. But his ego wouldn't let him back down now. "Bully, I'm holding you accountable. Something your enablers clearly never did." "Enablers?" Depp's voice rose, to a level that made everyone in the studio take notice. "You don't know the first thing about my life, my struggles, or what I've been through. You sit there in your comfortable chair, making jokes about other people's pain, and you think that makes you some kind of moral authority?" The tension in the room was now palpable, electric in its intensity. Production assistants were frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, unsure whether they should cut to commercial or let the confrontation continue. The band members looked like they wanted to disappear entirely, while the audience sat in shocked silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply leave. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the situation but unwilling to admit defeat, made one final devastating comment. "You know what, Johnny? Maybe if you spent less time playing dress-up and pretending to be a pirate, and more time being a responsible adult, you wouldn't be in this situation." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Depp's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, and finally, a cold fury that seemed to transform his entire presence. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet, but every word carried the weight of absolute finality. "That's it," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm done with this charade." The words reverberated through the studio like a gunshot. Depp began removing his microphone with deliberate, controlled movements, each action a statement of defiance. But Kimmel, either unable to read the room or simply too invested in his own ego to stop, made the fatal mistake of continuing his attack. "Oh, what? You're going to storm off now? Just like you always do when things get tough?" Kimmel's voice carried a mocking tone that would prove to be his biggest miscalculation of the evening. "Run away, Johnny. That's what you do best, isn't it?" Depp stopped dead in his tracks. The microphone he had been removing fell to the floor with a sharp thud that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. When he turned back to face Kimmel, his expression was unlike anything the audience had ever seen from the usually charming actor. This wasn't the quirky, eccentric performer they knew from the movies. This was a man who had been pushed beyond his absolute limit. "Run away." Depp's voice was now filled with a controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. "You want to see what happens when I don't run away, Jimmy? You want to see what happens when someone finally stands up to your pathetic excuse for journalism?" The audience collectively held its breath. Some were pulling out their phones, desperately trying to capture what they instinctively knew would become one of the most viral moments in television history. Others simply stared in shock, unable to process the complete breakdown of what should have been a routine celebrity interview. Depp moved closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence commanding the entire studio. "For years, you've made a living off mocking people, tearing them down, making jokes about their pain and their struggles. You hide behind your writers, your producers, your network, thinking that gives you the right to destroy people for entertainment." Kimmel, for the first time all evening, seemed to realize he might have gone too far. His usual smug confidence was beginning to crack as he faced the full force of Depp's anger. "Johnny, look, maybe we should—" "No!" Depp's voice boomed through the studio, cutting off any attempt at backpedaling. "You don't get to control this narrative anymore. You wanted the real Johnny Depp? Here I am. You wanted to see what happens when you push someone to their breaking point? Congratulations, Jimmy. You've succeeded." The actor's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "But let me tell you something about accountability, since you seem so concerned with it. I've faced my demons. I've owned my mistakes. I've been through hell and come out the other side. But you're still the same coward you've always been, hiding behind your desk, making cheap shots at people who've actually lived. Security." Personnel began moving closer to the stage area, unsure of what might happen next, but clearly preparing for any possibility. The show's producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, but the raw, unfiltered drama unfolding was unlike anything they had ever dealt with. Kimmel attempted one last weak jab, his voice noticeably less confident than before. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that got you in trouble in the first place, Johnny. You can't handle criticism, so you lash out." Depp laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. "Criticism? Is that what you call this character assassination? Jimmy, criticism is constructive. What you've done tonight is something else entirely. You've revealed exactly who you are to everyone watching." The actor straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. "I want everyone to remember this moment. Remember what you've seen here tonight. This is what happens when media figures think they can destroy people for ratings. This is what happens when someone finally says enough." Turning back to Kimmel, Depp delivered his final devastating blow. "You know what the difference is between us, Jimmy? When I mess up, I face the consequences. I own it. I work to make it right. But you'll wake up tomorrow and pretend this was all just part of the show. You'll make jokes about it, spin it, try to make yourself the victim. Because that's what cowards do." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usually animated audience seemed frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply process what they had witnessed. Kimmel sat speechless for what felt like an eternity, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. Depp began walking toward the exit, but paused at the edge of the stage. Without turning around, he delivered his parting words. "I came here tonight to talk about art, about creativity, about the things that matter. Instead, I got ambushed by someone whose greatest talent is tearing others down. America deserves better than this kind of entertainment." As Depp walked off the stage, the audience began to react. What started as scattered applause quickly grew into something much more significant. People were standing, cheering not for the conflict, but for someone who had finally stood up to what many saw as the worst aspects of celebrity culture and media manipulation. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, visibly shaken and struggling to regain his composure. For several long moments he said nothing, clearly unsure how to proceed. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after these messages." But the damage was done. As the cameras cut to commercial, the studio buzzed with conversation. Phones were buzzing with social media notifications, and everyone present knew they had witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. The confrontation was over, but its impact was just beginning. Johnny Depp had walked off the stage, but he had also walked away as someone who had finally said what millions of viewers had been thinking about the state of celebrity journalism and entertainment media. In standing up for himself, he had also stood up for everyone who had ever been torn down for the sake of ratings and cheap laughs. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had instead become a defining moment, not just for both men involved, but for an entire industry that often forgot the human cost of its entertainment.